No, Chomsky, I'd like to ask you about the enormous civilian casualties that have shocked the entire world in this last Israeli offensive. The Israelis claim, on the one hand, that it's the unfortunate result of the Hamas hiding among the civilian population. But you've said in a recent analysis that this has been Israeli policy almost from the founding of the state, the attack on civilian populations. Could you explain?
They say so. I was just quoting the chief of staff. This is 30 years ago. And virtually no Palestinian terrorism in Israel. Virtually, he said our policy has been to attack civilians, and the reason was explained by villages, towns, and so on, and it was explained by Abba Eban, the distinguished statesman, who said, yes, that's what we've done, and we did it for a good reason. There was a rational prospect that if we attack the civilian population and cause it enough pain, they will press for what he called a cessation of hostilities. That's a euphemism, meaning cessation of resistance against Israel's takeover of the moves which were going on at the time to take over the occupied territories. So sure, if they will kill enough of them so that they'll press for quiet to permit us to continue what we're doing. Actually, Obama today didn't put it in those words, but the meaning is approximately the same. That's the meaning of his silence over the core issue of settling and takeover of the occupied territories and eliminating the possibility for any Palestinian meaningful independence, omission of this. But Eban and Gur, who I was quoting, chief of staff, would have also said, my heart bleeds for the civilians who are suffering, but what can we do? We have to pursue the rational prospect that if we cause them enough pain, they'll call off any opposition to our takeover of their lands and resources. But it was, I was just quoting it. They've said it very frankly. That was 30 years ago, and there's plenty more beside that.
And Obama's call to open up Gaza, to end the blockade of Gaza on the Israelis, do you see that as any kind of a meaningful turn?
It would. Those are nice words, and if he did it, that would be fine. But there's any indication that he means it. In fact, this morning on the Israel has already made it clear, stated explicitly, its foreign minister Tzipi Livni, that they're not going to live up to the ceasefire until Gaza returns to them a captured soldier. Well, that avoids the fact that Israel is far in the lead, not in capturing soldiers, but in kidnapping civilians, hijacking ships, bringing them to Israel as hostages. In fact, one day before this Israeli soldier was captured at the border, Israeli forces entered Gaza and kidnapped 2 civilians and took them to Israel, where they were hidden away in the prison system sometime. So, and in fact, according to reports I just received from Israel, I can't give you a source, they say that the radio news this morning has been reporting steadily that Amos Gilad, who's the go-between between Israel and Egypt, notified the Egyptians that Israel is not interested in a ceasefire agreement, but rather on an arrangement to stop the missiles and to free Gilad Shalit. Okay, I presume that'll be in the newspapers later. So yes, it's nice to say let's open the borders, but not avoiding the conditions that are imposed. In fact, not even mentioning the fact that the borders have been closed for years because the United States has backed Israeli closure of them. And again, his main point, which he started with, Israel, like any democracy, has a right to defend itself. That is true, but deceitful, because it has a right to defend itself, but not by force, especially when there are peaceful options that are completely open, the narrow one being a ceasefire, which the U.S. and Israel would observe for the first time, and the second and the deeper one by ending the crimes in the occupied territories.
Noam Chomsky, the timing of all of this. Can you talk about Election Day here in the United States, November 4th? What exactly happened there? And then the fact that it went from Election Day to 3 days before the inauguration of Barack Obama, Israel's announcement of a unilateral ceasefire.
On Election Day, November 4th, Israel violently violated a ceasefire that had held pretty well. In fact, a sharp reduction in rockets, probably not even from Hamas. It had been established as June or July. On November 4th, Election Day, presumably because the attention was shifted elsewhere, Israeli forces entered Gaza, killed half a dozen what they call militants, and the pretext was they found a tunnel in Gaza. Well, from a military point of view, that's an absurdity. If there was a tunnel, and if it ever reached the Israeli border, they'd stop it right there. So this was obviously just a way to break the ceasefire, kill a couple of Hamas militants, and ensure that the conflict could go on. As for the bombing, it was very carefully timed. And in fact, they've told us this. They've told us it was meticulously timed for months before the invasion. Every target selected, timing, everything. It began on a Saturday, timed right before noon, when children were leaving schools. People milling in the streets of the densely populated city, perhaps the most densely in the world. That's when it began. They killed a couple hundred people in the first few minutes, and it ended. It was timed to end right before the inauguration. Now, presumably the reason was Obama had kept silent about the atrocities and the killings, whole horrible story, which you can see on Al Jazeera, even little bits of it here. He'd kept silent on the pretext that there's only one president. Well, on Inauguration Day, that goes. There's a new president, and Israel surely wanted to make it to ensure that he would not be in a position where he would have to say something about the ongoing atrocities. So they terminated it, probably temporarily, right before the inauguration, and then he could go on with what we heard today.
Noam Chomsky, I want to turn for a second to George Mitchell, who President Obama has